caught up with our old friend Gerald Posner, best-selling writer, author, investigative reporter, doing a lot of columnizing and reporting these days as well via justthefacts.media. And he's kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems Hotline. It sounds like things are as busy as usual, or maybe even busier. Is that possible?
Yeah, I don't know if they're busier, Dan, but they're certainly busy. And I mean, I just was out in Phoenix, a wonderful Scottsdale area, taping 3 new courses. I was doing Journalism 102, The Politics of Cancer, and The Secrets of Big Pharma for Jordan Peterson's online academy. So that was an intensive 10 days, 24 hours of courses, and I sort of managed to turn myself into a quasi-professor for a little bit of time.
What's that? That's a nice change of pace for you. I think you may have done some of that before, but I don't think probably this intensively. What's that? How have you found that experience?
I found it as, I take my head off to teachers. I had great teachers sometimes when I was in college and at law school, and I took it for granted that was just easy enough for them to do. They got up and they talked about what they had already known in the past, and they passed it on to me, and it was digestible and fun, and I learned a lot. And then I learned when I had to do it myself, it's different from just presenting information. If you're actually doing a course, and you want to make people not just understand the information, but it's useful to them in some way. Mm-hmm. So I try to turn the big pharma story into how to be a smarter patient, how to turn Journalism 102 into how to write a nonfiction bestseller. I don't have any secret for that. It's not like all of a sudden, there are 8 different rules, and if you follow them, you'll be at the top of the bestseller list. But there are things I've learned over years by doing it, and the challenge was to turn it into a format where people could watch it and say, oh, yeah, okay, I picked up something on that.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, I'm sure it wasn't easy, but it also sounds like it's a good way to sort of challenge yourself in a different way, right, from actually doing the journalism day by day.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I will say also, I present, I sort of created my own PowerPoints for each of these courses, and I'm not a PowerPoint expert by any means, but I certainly learned to curse and scream and want to throw my computer down at times. I mastered the art of being able to do it in an interesting way and make the slides good and useful. But I will say that it was some process. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad they gave me the opportunity to do it.
Well, I don't want to get too far afield here, but it strikes me as you mentioned that. I just read a piece, I think just within the last week or two, that might have been on the Atlantic Online. And the premise of the piece was that at movie schools or at schools in which, individuals are studying film, that the biggest challenge right now is getting the students to actually watch an entire movie. That they're finding, like with everything else, the attention span has been lessened to such a degree that they're on their phones, they're looking around, that they're far more interested even then of maybe even getting other opinions about a movie online than perish the thought, actually watching it in its entirety, trying to process, what you think of it, et cetera, which is a little on the scary side. Maybe not surprising.
No, absolutely. That is, and it's very interesting. I mean, it's possible that people who end up taking and looking at the course about how to write a nonfiction bestseller may not actually be interested in reading a full book right now. They may be thinking of doing their own book. Right. They may not have that patience or ability to, they're thinking of writing a book, but they're not reading them. So I didn't read that in the Atlantic, but that's unfortunately not surprising, just disappointing.
Looking at a headline on one of your more recent pieces, the internet on trial, a Los Angeles courtroom may force big tech to answer what it knew about children, addiction, and design. Obviously, this is a case that's caught your eye. Give us the background, give us some of the details, and why you think it could be a really significant case.
So, Dan, nobody, when I say nobody, it's not quite true. Very few people, a lot of media, they're not paying a lot of attention to this case right now because it seems distant, it's too far away, and the response I get from some journalists when I talk about it is, well, it's not telling us anything new. What the case was brought on behalf of this 19-year-old woman. They identify her only in the suit by her initials, KGM. And she is, claims that she was damaged by use of social media. It leads to a whole series of problems if you become addicted to it or compulsively use it as a teenager. Anxiety, self-harm, depression, eating disorders, suicidal ideation, you name it. She and her lawyers are seeking not just damages, but also changes to the product design. And they sued TikTok and Snapchat and Facebook and YouTube. Now, TikTok and Snapchat settled. Facebook, Meta, and YouTube have not. So this is the first one to get to trial of literally you have to look jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but about 1,000 cases, as I can add them up, that are similar, that are moving through state and federal courts. This is a tsunami, a tidal wave of litigation that's just about to crest on shore. This is the first one. And I think it will have major ramifications if they prevail, because it will sort of open up the floodgates even more. We've seen this happen before on tobacco. We've seen it happen on OxyContin and opioids and other areas. And so this might be the one that breaks through. You write that basically, the allegation here is that companies, including Insta, Facebook, YouTube, designed features that made their platforms extraordinarily difficult for children to disengage from, thereby contributing to things like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harm, et cetera, et cetera. So, a lot of people have said, well, is this a tobacco moment? But is this, in your mind, now I don't think you practice law anymore, but you did, and you're very familiar with the law. On the basis of what you know, is it going to be a lot more difficult to prove when we're talking about, the mental side of things in terms of disengaging from this sort of addiction as opposed to a tobacco addiction? Well, we don't know, and that's why I'm so excited. You don't have to be a lawyer to be excited about this, but maybe that's part of why I'm so excited about this, because we're about to get into discovery. And it's pretty hard for the average person to get excited about litigation discovery, but discovery is where we're going to find these things out. We're going to know afterwards, not now, as to whether this evidence exists or not. When tobacco in the 90s, you have to remember the CEOs of the major tobacco companies got in front of Congress and said their products weren't addictive. They had paid and financed a whole bunch of studies. Nobody knew that their money was behind it. They countered the evidence it was addictive. They made the science unsettled. Yes. And then it wasn't until you got into the suits and you were able to find out that they actually knew about it inside the companies. You were saying, oh, don't tell anybody about that. Oh, let's not show them that study. That's what we don't know here about tech. So once you get into the study, the question isn't, of course, these platforms make money the more time you spend on them, all of them. And as a result, they design themselves with very, very good tech people to try to keep you attached to the platforms. I get that. The question that we don't know the answer to is, did they do their own internal studies that said, oh, by the way, on adolescent brains, this could really be harmful. And then somebody says inside the company, well, let's not tell them about that. Mm-hmm. Similar, yeah, and that would be, I guess, some of the similarity about the tobacco case. What did they know, and when did they know it? And to your point, now maybe we get a little bit more hard evidence than a lot of supposition and speculation if this case, follows the way it might. Right. And look, I know that. One of the things I said to you, earlier was some journalists I spoke to sort of have a shrug about it, and not because the case doesn't have significance and might not be the first very important case in terms of, tech and adolescent brains and whether they're addictive and whether tech knew that. But the response I get from some journalists is, well, we know that. We know that the products are addictive. We use them that way, much less kids. And we know that they have bad effects. And, I try to keep my kids off of it. People will tell me all the time, and not very successfully. But that doesn't mean that, it's still not an important case, because I do think that this may not be the case that blows it all open, but it's the first one that's going to trial. And that's why Meta and YouTube are taking a gamble. TikTok and Snapchat, reaching this undisclosed amount in terms of a settlement, they're not going to be able to settle their way out of all of this litigation. You can't settle 1,000 of these lawsuits or more as they come in. At some point, there's going to have to be a trial, and the industry is going to have to either say, we have some culpability and liability, or we don't, because regulators aren't doing it. So legislators aren't doing it. Nobody else is sort of stepping on top of the tech companies. So litigation's a blunt tool. I get it. Nobody likes it. People don't like trial attorneys. I get it. They're not my favorite people. Wall Street Journal did a piece saying this is just a money grab by trial attorneys. I don't agree with that. I think this is actually, based upon everything I know, at least makes a legitimate claim. Now the question is whether that claim can be supported with the evidence they find out.
And to your point, it is, if we've decided, I don't know how, if the science is settled officially about the addictive nature. I think we're certainly headed that way, but it's a matter of what they might have known and might have been deceptive about, or what they might have buried in that regard. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a sort of what I call a split. And I talk about this in the Substack article. There's a split between those people who think that what's addictive is the device. It's the phone, because the phone is so easy to carry around. You have it in your pocket, you have it in your backpack, whatever else. If everything was the size of an 11-inch iPad, maybe it wouldn't be as addictive a product. But it's so simple. So they actually think the device is the driver. There are others who think it's social media, and that's why you end up with these defendants. They think that the phone may be the tool, the delivery system, but social media is the actual fuel. And I have this, in my worst and most cynical moments, I have this view where eventually, Meta and TikTok and others and YouTube will say, it's not us. It's the phone that's to blame. We're just providing the software on it. It's Apple. Go after Apple and go after Samsung. But I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, very few people are focusing on that. And without those apps, you could have the phone, but if you don't have material on the phone, the kids and we and others are interested in, you're not going to stay on the phone.
Let's touch on a couple other things in the remaining minutes. Gerald Posner, kind enough to join us. I want to read you a tweet from a man named Damon Linker, who you might know or might recognize the name.
Right.
And this is, I think, in the wake of the news that the Washington Post has pretty much gutted major sections, literally, of its newspaper today. That announcement came earlier today. Here's the Linker observation. In the future, parentheses, meaning next week, the totality of American journalism will be the New York Times plus thousands of Substacks with Getty Images subscriptions. Is he right?
I don't think so. Legacy media certainly has its challenges, without any doubt. I understand that. And, a lot of people don't like the way that they'll complain about the Wall Street Journal being too conservative and the New York Times and the Washington Post and LA Times being far too liberal, and they view it as being through those different lenses. But those organizations still play, and people hate when I say this because I have a Substack. Substack doesn't control the world. What controls the world is still those major papers with reporters, the free press, and everybody else who have carved it out. But people like Schellenberger, people like and others. Barry Weiss has made a big difference. Matt Taibbi. So independent journalists have made a difference, and I like to think that some of us, in a smaller way, who are writing and trying to stick to the old-fashioned ways of doing journalism, which is you call up, you get your sources, you confirm everything, can also have an effect on the news. But I don't think it's just going to be the New York Times and Substack.
It is interesting. The New York Times numbers, when it comes to online subscriptions, I mean, their numbers, if they're accurate, are astonishing. I mean, they seem to be the one, national outlet that thrives in that regard. I don't know what they figured out, but they, in a world, so many metropolitan-sized newspapers that were never necessarily national in scope, the way the Times was and is, are struggling, and cutting back and no longer putting out real news, putting out the broadsheet newspapers. There's nothing. It's just all online at this point. I think the Wall Street Journal actually digitally is doing quite well as well, but there ain't many that seem to be able to pull that off right now.
No, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, it's really remarkable because papers that I read and look at a lot of sources of information. I read other Substacks. I look at newspapers. I watch some online news, and I try to pull it all together from different perspectives. And the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, where I'm located at, the Boston Globe, for the most part, they've been decimated in many ways.
Yes.
They're a shadow of their former selves. They still have the Globe used to have in Boston the Spotlight team that would do these, special investigations. They still do them, but at a slower pace and not as much. And people may not like that, but it's true. And you're right. The Times has done very, very well. In part, its subscription base grew dramatically in the first Trump administration.
True,
and then
that's right.
sort of leveled off a little bit, and then grew again during COVID. And the new Trump administration, I think, is another growth spurt for it in some ways. But there's no doubt that it has prospered, where a lot of newspapers have just struggled to stay above the what I call the shallow end of the pool and keep their head above the water.
I know you know this story quite well, but I want to get your reaction to it because you've done a lot of reporting on it as well. This is out of the New York Times. The American Medical Association today endorsed restrictions on gender-related surgeries for minors, saying they generally should not be performed until the patients reach adulthood. This came on the heels of the announcement that on yesterday from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, who took a similar position, saying such procedures should be detailed until age 19. Give me your reaction, whether this is a sea change that is starting, and how much of it has to do with a case that you've written about, by the way, a case that's getting a lot of attention, being linked to exactly these sorts of reversals starting to take place.
So my feeling, in a couple of words about those two medical organizations, the AMA and the American Plastic Surgery Society, changing their views and modifying them and rolling back on endorsing gender-affirming care for kids is about time. It's long overdue. The medical associations across the board have been captured ideologically by this. They've been endorsing this in America, not in other countries. In the UK, there was a large report, and they backed off of hormones and surgery a couple of years ago. They've done that in Scandinavian countries where they had been very permissive and sort of liberal about this before. But American medical associations continue to say, no, this is the right thing. Gender-affirming care, quote unquote, for kids is the proper medical treatment. And I do think there was a $2 million settlement, a judgment in a White Plains, New York court just a week and a half ago.
Yep.
It was not on whether gender-affirming care was right or wrong. You're right, I wrote about this. It was a malpractice case, but still it sort of sent a shot across the bow. I think these medical associations have been thinking about a change for some time, and they are finally making it. I'm still waiting for the American Psychiatric Association, which I've written about, which has a textbook out that's disgraceful, and the American Psychologist Association, the APA. They have not come at all. And I think that what they're doing here may be litigation protection in the future,
right?
But it's also because they're listening to the counterweight. They are no longer just buying the progressive view of this, that you have to endorse it and stamp it and approve it.
The White Plains case, as I understand it, I believe, is more about whether, like you said, it's not taking a position on the surgery so much as whether proper procedure, proper deliberations were put in place all along that process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. They didn't ask jurors to decide the big, broad questions about gender medicine. It focused just on the specific doctors and whether they had exercised appropriate medical judgment. And the case was really a bad case. I mean, a bad case for the doctors. The plaintiff, and she was a 16-year-old girl when she had a double mastectomy. So both her breasts were taken off in 2019 when she was 16. They had weeks of testimony in this, how a system really that was supposed to protect kids instead accelerated her toward this irreversible harm. And she's now, 22. She no longer identifies as transgender. And the jury found that the psychological evaluation, the surgical decision-making, all of that was really deeply, grossly negligent.
Why I know written a lot about this over a long period of time. I'm guessing taking a lot of heat too, which we'll get to in a minute. But why does there seem to be such a wide disparity between much of Europe's approach in this regard, which is, I think, more deliberate or more conservative, one could say, than what has the last 20 years or so tend to take a hold in the United States?
Well, I think that we came to it later in the U.S. Than they had in Europe, certainly in the Scandinavian countries.
Right.
And then, what often happens here, we take a little bit of a good thing and we say, God, if that's something that might be all right, let's put it on steroids. And, we've done that on opioid painkillers. We've done on any number of things. And so when it came to gender-affirming care, it became from a small idea of what might happen for children who were being diagnosed with this condition and therefore were under the view of a psychologist. I ended up doing a story a year and a half ago called Who Put the Kids in Charge? And what we essentially did in the U.S. was said, by the way, if somebody comes into your practice as a psychologist or psychiatrist and they say at 14, 13, 15, whatever, I think that I'm another gender, I'm trapped in the wrong body, you cannot say no to them. You can't essentially contest it. You can't fight them because that would be the equivalent of, sending them into a spiral that could lead them to suicide. And it became an accepted fact, I put fact in quotes, that if you said no, you turned down, you stopped a child who wanted to transition to another sex, which is impossible, but they think they can surgically do it, that they would commit suicide. So you're better off with they would say a living girl, if it was a boy, than a dead son. It turns out that those studies, time and time again, now we've gone through the figures, just not true. The risk of suicide is higher for LGBT kids anyway than it is for straight kids. It's just slightly higher for those who identify as transgender or non-binary. But the highest group are those who try to convert to another gender or sex and then are called detransitioners, decide they want to come back and find out they can't because surgically they've had parts of their bodies amputated. And when they can't come back, that's the highest rate of suicide. So it's remarkable that we are essentially running a clinical trial in real time on children in this country. And now, as you say, we have the medical associations that should be giving advice to doctors saying, let's slow up a little bit. That should have been the advice from the very beginning. Let's slow up and decide that the science is there before we do it. But we did it the other way around.
Well, one follow-up question on that. As I said, you've been writing on that topic for a while. I'm assuming, what's the heat like? Because, as you say, you come from historically what would be classified as sort of the liberal political tradition, I think. That's what you grew up in. And
right.
Also a sort of scholarly, I'm going to report what I can learn in front of me, regardless of what direction this ends up going. But I don't think that's been enough for a lot of people. So how much heat have you been dealing with over the period of time you've been exploring this subject?
So the first time I wrote about it was actually back in 2023 for the Wall Street Journal in an op-ed called The Truth About Puberty Blockers, in which I just laid out the risk of puberty blockers when you give hormones that are not approved by the FDA, that are given off-label to kids to stop their production of their natural hormones. So boy, you stop testosterone, a girl, you stop estrogen, and then after a year or so, if they decide they still want to transition, you start them on the cross-sex hormones, the hormones of the opposite sex. And I explained what the dangers were of puberty blockers. You would have thought that I was writing something that said, I want to discriminate against transgender people.
Right.
It's not at all what I'm saying. I believe that people identify as transgender, adults, 18 and older, you can end up doing what you want. I don't necessarily want the federal government or the taxpayer paying for it, but you can do it. I don't think people should be discriminated against because they're transgender. I have all of that view, but I realize that when it comes to children and to kids, it should be a different standard because they don't have informed consent. It's being given by parents. I saw the other day testimony in one of these situations by a parent who said that she knew when her child was 2 that the child wanted to transition. I said in response to that on X, well, when I meet somebody and they say, I have a vegan dog, that tells me more about the owner than it does about the dog. It's this transference of what the owner thinks the dog should have. And I think it's the same thing with parents sometimes, seeing this in 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. It's just not the science.
Last item for today, not a connected, well, I guess maybe in some ways it is semi-connected subject. A headline in Variety: J.K. Rowling denies inviting Jeffrey Epstein to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child Broadway opening. DOJ docs show he was turned away at the door. And I want to get your reaction to one of the reactions I saw online to get into this subject, at least briefly. This is Robbie Sove wrote this: a desperate attempt to smear J.K. Rowling fails, but at what cost? We are now at the point where every single notable person has to comb through their events, guest lists for the last 2 decades and make sure they never invited, interacted, or happened to encounter a person. And encounter a person who was desperately trying to attach himself to fame. Their attempts to defend themselves take the form of X denies Epstein connection. Do you still say this isn't a witch hunt? So I ask you, this may be an impossible question in the remaining minutes we have to even answer, but how do you thread the needle on following the facts, holding the right individuals accountable if they haven't already, that have ties to Epstein that might go beyond just whether they patted him on the back? How do you thread that needle without us losing our minds and reaching the point where literally these are the kinds of sort of explanations and demands that are being made pretty much every day as more and more of these documents get released and more of them get examined? What's the balancing act here?
Well, I mean, the balancing act is eventually going to be that you're going to have to find out. Somebody's name appears inside the documents in the Epstein files, and they automatically are tar and feathered without people understanding anything else. And J.K. Rowling's a perfect example of it. That if people have been angry at her online, you think, I've had people angry at me, take that and make it 10,000 times more.
Right.
Why? Because, she stands up for women's only spaces, protecting them, not having men who identify as women to come into them. And she's very strong on stopping the gender treatment of children. And she's viewed by many people as being, as a result, transphobic. They don't like her. She has all types of haters. The minute her name appears anywhere in the Epstein files, that's enough for people to say, see, she wasn't caring about those children. It's absolutely false. I've talked about this. To me, it's a slander, and it is the slander of the moment. So that if you appear in the Epstein files, you get tar and feathered for this. There are people that are going to have, like Mandelson, who's the former cabinet officer in the UK, going to have some real difficulties. Andrew, the prince who's had his title removed in the royal family, looks like he's in deeper water than ever. And people over here, I'm sure, will be sorry that they ever had long Epstein associations, and they will be exposed. But in cases like Rowling, I see it being used online by so-called influencer accounts that don't like her position on women's rights, believe it or not, and they're sort of hammering out to the point where she has to, as you said, deny it. So it's like somebody saying, when did you stop? We used to joke about this in law school. When did you stop beating your wife? Is the question you would ask for somebody. And they would say, I don't beat my wife. But they would be answering the question about when did they stop beating their wife. It's how you pose the question in an inflammatory way or make the accusation, and therefore some of it sticks. And Dan, I guarantee you, there will be people who just look at a passing headline or an X commentary or some meme and they'll say, do you know J.K. Rowling was associated with Epstein? And it's just bogus. And that is the part of this that is quite infuriating. I like X, I like social media, I use it. I just don't like the cesspool that goes along with it sometimes. I
appreciate the time as always. It's great to catch up, and we'll stay in touch as always. Thanks, Gerald.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks.
I appreciate you. Gerald Posner on a number of, I think, pretty interesting and compelling subjects. Bradshaw and Bryan KFAN text line is open at 64686. Don't forget Kessler in about an hour.
Dave Chappelle returns to Minnesota February 16th with very special guest clips. And don't miss out this one-off, one-of-a-kind set, Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul. Tickets are on sale now. All the details, KFAN.com, keyword calendar.
All right, so we've got, I'll get to some text reacting to our half-hour conversation with Gerald Posner, award-winning investigative reporter, author, case closed, did the definitive Kennedy assassination book that's really never been topped, although our good friend Vincent Bugliosi, the late great, tried to with a much... That book, I think in hardcover, because it got sent to me when we had him on, and I think the hardcover book weighed like 52 pounds.
You couldn't check it. You'd have to pay for an extra bag.
Exactly.
If you checked it on a flight, it'd be over the 50-pound limit.
Along with it, it was accompanied by like one of those CD-ROMs that had all kinds of added info. It's the most exhaustive and very well done. But Gerald kind of got there first, and he's written about Big Pharma, all sorts of things. MLK assassination. He's one of the best. So we'll get to some of the texts that have come in response to several subjects that we explored with him. But we got no big... We got our cell phone. We're waiting for that big trade that the Wolves are going to make. It hasn't been made yet. In fact, to this point, we've only made one deal, and we have not received any players in return. Correct? In that one deal.
Did you get the press release? The press release is very funny.
The headline was, wasn't it? What did it say?
Wolves acquire cash considerations.
Cash considerations.
People had some fun with that.
Yes. And so the assumption at the time was, well, we're kind of greasing the wheels, improving our options to make a big deal. We don't know that that's the case. It's possible, but it hasn't happened yet. Got less than 24 hours now. And if you're in the group like Sam Mitchell, Sam joined us at 3:30, that Kobe White might have been an interesting piece for this team that could have helped them, at least in the short run. Remember, that's no longer an option. White, part of a deal in which he goes, where does he go? He goes from Chicago.
Charlotte.
To Charlotte, right? And by the way, Mike Conley is in that deal too, which parenthetically we should add means that because he's already been traded twice, he could end up back here on a minimum deal if he is released.
Bought out.
Or bought out, yep. I guess I should say. Yeah, you're right.
He might be on the show at 6 o'clock tonight.
That's the thing, because he originally was going to be on at 3 yesterday. Then we found out he was traded, and then we just did a series of salutes. We may have time to salute him in person, or at least on the phone when like you say, he's on with us at 6 o'clock.
People had a great idea because the Wolves put out like a highlight reel, like thanks for the memories.
Yes.
If they do reacquire him, I think theoretically it could be done by Friday when the Wolves play. They should play that video welcoming him back.
That's true. That'd be great.
Even though he's barely been gone.
Barely been gone for like a minute and a half. But what needs to be, I guess, noted is, well, now it's a moot point because White's already been traded. But the one downside in using the Conley salary as a trade chip, that's your biggest trade chip that they have among players that you're willing to deal, right? Because he makes a little more money. Is that once you use it the way the Wolves did, you no longer have it as a chip to actually get the guard that you're looking for who might help you, including Kobe White. And you're left with still other players you can get, including one or two of the guards the Bulls still have, but I don't think they're considered on the same level. It would be cheaper. So I don't think right now, I'm never going to say never on Giannis because we've seen things come together late. We know Tim Conley is a very determined, aggressive guy, and he's creative. So maybe tonight he's going to wake up from a cold stone slumber at 2:30 in the morning and say, this is how we do it. Here's the way we get this thing done. I don't think you can rule any of that out. But the betting money right now is he's not going to end up in Minnesota before the trade deadline, he being Giannis. So then you're left with, well, is there a B level move at least if the A plus move is not available? Well, it can't be Kobe White. So I don't think Charlotte's going to trade him again. The presumption is they took him because they want him. By the way, they're playing pretty good ball finally.
They're a game behind the Bulls, apparently.
Oh, is that right?
Is what I read Joe Cowley said.
Well, they played a lot better. So that's what we're left with. Is there, there's also hope that a couple of other buyouts will take place which might represent a player who could give the Wolves a little bit of depth off the bench, better than what they have now. What you're looking for is obviously somebody who's a veteran and maybe even somebody who's long in the tooth. But you don't think he's going to be part of your future. You just want something that I think they desperately need. Because I'll say again, I don't love their chances to even get back as far as they did a year ago without adding one piece of depth that can score. Because we went over it a million times. This is not the same team as last year. It's just not. You could say Edwards maybe is better than he was last year, but they're missing too much depth at this point that they had a year ago. So we'll see. But right now, and you've maybe been checking the wires. I don't even know about the sort of reckless speculation stories. If there's anything other than Giannis, is there a plan B that we haven't heard of any names that have been floated? Because the James Harden dream of mine died officially. Sam Mitchell thought I'd lost my mind for even considering it, which is I love Sam. Yeah,
Dan.
That's exactly it. But so that's where we are. Unless now the big deal today was street clothes guy. What's his name? Anthony Davis. Part of this mega deal. He goes to Washington. The Wizards have obviously gone from we're always rebuilding to bleep it. Let's go ahead and put a couple of main players together and see if we can get something done.
We need to pause.
Yes.
Can I run by some options to you of some other names that apparently
are in the mix?
Well, maybe. Okay. Maybe not. Right. One in particular reportedly wants to come here or Miami like Giannis.
Ah, that's a good tease. Let's do that. We'll get a quick pause in and explore that very controversial subject next. Text from people saying, why in the hell are we not clamoring for the Wolves to trade for Kyrie Irving? I've been given no indication that the Mavericks are in the mood to do that. Are they? Did I miss something?
No, you haven't, but that was one of the names that has been kind of speculated because of the Davis move.
As if they're saying, we're building everything around the 19-year-old and the timing's not right. But don't you have to keep, yeah, I would definitely consider it.
Yes.
I'd 100% consider it.
He may play this season yet.
Yes.
Coming off the ACL, correct. I think, a year ago.
Because I think I give him credit as a guy I rolled my eyes about Kyrie as much as anybody, but I thought in Dallas, in terms of on the court, I thought he handled himself very well. I really did.
He cooked us. It wasn't just Luka in the Western
did.
Conference
Now, whether
Finals.
that's, the new Kyrie that's going to stay, I don't know. But I had not read much nationally that the Mavericks were in that mood. But maybe what you're saying is because of this trade, the feeling is, would they get rid of both? I think that would be silly. To me, I'd rather see, I don't like the idea of we're going to make everybody that young, because I still think you lessen the chances that the young guys can do well if they don't have other people around them that are good enough, right? I think if you gut the thing, strip it down, but would I listen on him? Yes, I'd absolutely listen on him. But is that the name you were thinking of?
That was one of the names that
right.
I was going to throw out at you because it's been kind of thrown out there since Davis got moved.
Right.
And the name going back, because my whole thing on Giannis, I'm very torn because I'm worried about
I am too.
Just having two studs, and who are you playing with? And Bobby,
who's left?
I might play the sound for top 5 if we have time. But Bobby Marks and Windhorst on ESPN show today. Bobby Marks is an old GM.
They're capologist guy, basically. He's great about knowing all the ins and outs of salary and luxury tax and numbers fitting together and all those things.
He mentioned that his belief is by midnight tonight, if Giannis is going somewhere, the framework will have to be in place. Like all the Because the
Yeah,
Wolves
'cause
have
it's so- yeah.
the Wolves have to put like at least 3, maybe 4 teams in.
Correct.
And those are the reports, right?
Correct.
Because they got to find picks to try to get
Yes.
back to Milwaukee.
Yes.
Windhorst said if they want to trade him, they can trade him now. He goes, they have a deal from Miami they could take. They have a deal from Golden State that they could take. He did mention that the Wolves one is a little bit more complicated because of all the moving parts. And I'm very torn in. I mean, I'm even looking at like the Lakers with Luka and LeBron. And I know LeBron's not what he once was, and
And that's about to end. You're right.
he's
yeah.
a decade older
Yes.
than Giannis. So it's not perfect, but even with everybody's favorite third option, Austin Reeves, who just came back last night and played pretty well, I think, like they've just been okay, right?
Yes.
And I know it's just skinny Luka now, but it's hard when you have two dudes that make that much money, and Giannis eventually is going to need more because his contract's going to be up, I think, the same time Ants is, at least eligible for extensions. I just worry about, like Sam said, I worry about who's left to play with these guys. And I'm sure Tim Conley, that's not surprising to him.
Yeah.
That's not breaking
he's
any
not,
news.
I will say this about him. I don't think, if he believes that they're too gutted in terms of what they have to, how they have to satisfy Milwaukee, I don't think he'll do it. But there's every reason to be torn. For the reason you just laid out, I want to know what else you might get back as another piece. I think that mitigates it a little bit for me, but it's not automatic, especially the way the league is caught up. I've said, I admit it, part of it for me that I just like is that we're in the mix of it.
For sure.
That we're aggressively pursuing options in that regard. And for that same reason, I'll be very disappointed if we get to the trade deadline tomorrow and there are no moves. I really would. What are the other names that you had?
There's one player who also had a teammate traded recently.
Is this the one who wants to come here?
Who wants to come either here or the Timberwolves, does not want to play in Sacramento, who apparently is interested in him.
Okay.
Ja Morant.
Oh, God. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Well, you could probably get him cheap now.
That's been the
That's
theory
the comeback.
today, is that the Grizzlies' price for him has gone dramatically down.
I don't like him with Ant. I like Giannis better with Ant. I like Kyrie better with Ant, to be honest. But like I get it. The price is.
What if the price is just like? Let's just say it's like Randall,
right,
and something else. And I like Julius, but then Nas is a starter. You've got point guard depth all of a sudden. You've got a guy that
I'd have to
go
do
get 40. I know.
I just haven't seen much from him when he has played this year. He doesn't even look like the same explosive guy. Now, is that him because he's pouting? He's checked out? I don't know. I mean, that's the old you buy low, and you think you're going to be able to get him, back to that place. My gut is no, I wouldn't do it.
I've had to do some serious soul searching though the last couple of days on Harden, first of all, because I was kind of in the same spot you were in.
Yes.
Like, man, that would be interesting.
And then Sam made you realize the error of that. That's
got smacked us
back. Well, it turns out to be moot anyway because he's gone.
But Morant is the same thing, where it's like, can he figure it out? Because he's obviously, I mean, since we played them, basically, when they were the 2 seed, it's been a mess.
It has been. That's true.
It's been a mess on and off the court.
Somebody's telling us that Lonzo Ball.
That was the other name I was going to bring up.
Is going to be brought up by the Jazz. I 2 things to say. One, I don't know that I've seen him play at all this year, so I don't know how he's looked. I'm looking at his numbers. This was obviously with Cleveland.
Yep.
He was averaging 21 minutes a game, only shooting 30% from the floor. He's never been a great shooter. 27% from 3. Looking at his assist total, he's averaging 4.6 points, and where are the assists? 3.9 assists. I, in the past, have been intrigued by what I thought he could do. The problem is he such a liability offensively? Because one of the frustrations with Mike has been lately his shooting has gone down. So are you getting somebody in that regard who's not going to be able to help you either because he can't shoot? Obviously, that would be cheap. I would consider it, yes.
So those were the 3 names that it's funny that 2 of them were via text because those were just the 3 names that have kind of been buzzing around Wolves Twitter. And then obviously the Giannis one is the big one that's still going.
Yeah, and look, I was going to say Illinois because they played at the University. Who's the kid? He starts
Ayo Dosunmu.
Dosunmu. He's still with the Bulls, right?
He is.
Now, I don't think he's as good would be as much of a help as Kobe White, but there's people who've talked about him. There may be a couple other ones below the radar. So, yeah, the next, I don't know, less than now, 24 hours, is going to be very, very interesting to see. And Winderman's probably right that if there's going to be a deal, because of its complicated nature, it would have to be by the end of this evening. Top five?
Wolves play tonight. Wild play tonight. Gophers play tonight. And most important, we've got JJ on JJ from the Super Bowl.